It's been great. I mean, obviously being on hiatus for so long and now doing something new again, it's like kind of like it's like you're the first kind of sniff of what you've done is by folks that obviously are going to grade you and score you and tell you how it is or isn't like what's something that you've done. It's trial by fire, and then obviously we get to go play some shows and get kind of that feedback as well. So it's good though, because we recorded the album about over a year ago, and so this is kind of the first time now that folks are finally getting to hear it, and it's just kind of cool to just it's always cool to just hear what folks might think or hear or feel from what you've done.
I assume that in a normal cycle you're kind of out there touring and playing, and maybe you'll play some of the songs live and then the reviews come in. But is this a side effect of COVID, or is it just a side effect of not playing in the band for however many years?
It's probably a little bit of both. I mean, Midlake we've never been really that prolific in just churning stuff out, and we also haven't switched gears that well where we're either recording or we're touring. So this gave a very definite kind of like long cycle of doing nothing or obviously recording there towards the end and then getting out there. So yeah, it kind of probably for a lot of folks, because we didn't say anything for a long time, there was no real expectation, maybe we work best with low expectations or no expectations.
You didn't say anything as far as like signaling to people that you were still in a band, that you're going to continue to put out music?
I mean, we probably had some like cryptic, just like lines out there of existence, because obviously we did still exist. We were still friends. We're still doing other projects. We're making music. We're starting families and stuff. So it's not like we had gone away. We just hadn't put out a new record, and I guess understandably that's the definition of existence. If you're making new music and touring, which we weren't doing.
It seems like the announcement of the record and then the reviews and going on tour, everything happened in pretty quick succession. That's hurry up and wait, I suppose.
Yeah, it did in the sense that, once, we knew when things were going to be able to be, I guess, announced or released. But we had started talking about this in 2019. We didn't know what was ahead of us. But because of that, it kind of, in some ways, for lack of a better term, it put us at the back of the line, because there was so much music and shows that got pushed that we were just kind of thinking we were on schedule of a band putting out a new record or going on tour, and we're like, oh wait, we're gonna have to kind of stagger this a little bit, and we did, and have, and obviously our album's not even fully out yet. So it's been nice though to just kind of get out there, play these Texas residency shows, remember how to play a show and banter and dust off the boots a little bit to get out there and stay up past midnight.
Yeah, which I assume is the kind of thing that gets harder the older you get, and you've got kids and everything else. So you're probably, and during the pandemic, like I know I only speak for myself, but I know that I'm in bed by 10 these days.
Well, it's just hard to straddle both lifestyles is the thing. Like when you're on tour, you can be on a different schedule altogether, and your responsibilities are, being at sound check maybe, and obviously being at the show. Whereas it's different when you're at home and you're a husband and a father and whatever else responsibilities you might have. So to be doing these Texas residency shows amidst also going, oh yeah, like tomorrow I'm getting the kids up at 6 and taking them to school. Like, yeah, it's just hard to straddle, but it is what it is. I'm not going to lament that. It's yeah. It's good.
From when we're recording this, it's a couple of Denton shows at a bar/nightclub there. And then like all of a sudden you're in Europe, which is quite a jump.
Yeah. Yeah. And in a lot of ways, us guys, it's the double-edged sword of being away, and especially for a period of time where, there's just the absence of your normalcy and your family and all the things that we have here. And then it's kind of going on tour and working. Daddy's working, but you would be lying if it wasn't also this kind of appreciation of kind of being able to switch gears and your day-to-day changing a bit of what is the have to.
I mean, do you find yourself missing the road if you've gone an extended period and not toured?
Not necessarily, no. I mean, we've done a lot, and I appreciate it very much of what we've been able to see and do. I enjoy it, and I will enjoy it. But it's for me, it's not something that like I feel like I have to do and continue to do, or I think especially as things like evolve in our own personal lives, what is balance to us probably kind of changes, and I'm really quite content with the domestic kind of existence and what between my family and my friends and what I do here, I quite enjoy it. It doesn't mean that I won't enjoy traveling, but it's not something where I'm like, oh, I have to get out there. I have to leave. I have to get away and do that thing. So yeah, I think, and I hope that's a healthy thing where it's like, I enjoy it. It's a great thing, but even when I didn't have a family, I always loved returning home. It felt great to be back in Denton.
I say this not as a touring musician, but I think this applies to a lot of things in life. I mean, that sounds like probably the most healthy approach to it, because the flip side of that is that you're miserable in the place that you are and you're longing for that other thing.
Yeah, the grass can't always be greener, but both sides can be green,
Probably should have sort of phrased the question less being about being on tour and more about playing live. And obviously that's a big part of what you do. Is it hard to go long stretches and not have that live experience?
No, I will say with the shows that we did, especially being in kind of like our backyard of doing the Fort Worth and the Austin shows. And like you mentioned, we have these hometown shows coming up next month. It is a great feeling when people gather and celebrate music and sing back to you these songs. And especially over the past couple of years with not being able to do that, it was that much more impactful to be able to do so. And I think in some ways, and not, obviously, especially considering this time away, it has made us appreciate it that much more, and appreciate one another as well, just as friends. So, yes, of course, I miss that. I appreciate it, and I enjoy it. But you kind of try to put things in perspective as well, and I think that's a big part of even us doing this thing again, as Midlake has definitely done.
The hiatus or the pause or however you want to phrase it ended up being longer than anticipated. What would have been like 5 or 6 years turns into 8 years when there's a
Sure.
global pandemic happening. But it sounds like you were pretty cognizant of the fact that time away is exactly what you needed, that you knew that getting away from this thing that you had done for so long would, if everything went according to plan, re-energize everything.
Yeah, it was a very intentional decision. We were cognizant of the fact that things maybe weren't as healthy when we we're kind of on that last stretch of the campaign for Antiphon in 2014. And I really wanted to do other musical expressions. Obviously we did the collaborative banquet. I did a solo record. We worked with other artists as well, collectively and separately. And like I said, we started families, and not that those things could not coexist with Midlake. It's just that none of those things coexisted with Midlake up until then. We were very committed and kind of very intentional about doing that thing. And so I felt like it was a good time to step away with an honest expression of, I don't know if I want to or we want to do this thing again. And, there were respective experiences and revelations of sorts that brought people back to the idea of like, should just asking the question, should we try to work together as Midlake and write together as Midlake and hopefully make another album. So that is what happened. To your point, yeah, it probably took a little longer than it would have otherwise, but that wasn't something that was even sought out as a time frame.
It's one thing to say, hey, things are kind of rough and sticky right now, and for our own health and sanity and friendship and for the sake of this group, we need to step away. It's another thing, though, to say like, hey, I don't necessarily know if I want to keep doing it. And it sounds like there was a little bit of that latter camp in there. Yeah,
of course. There was both, we've never done it by obligation, like, okay, we have to do this. Of course, there's some bit of onus that you take on as far as, we obviously have a record label that maybe you've committed to X amount of albums. Obviously, you have a fan base that is interested in what you might do or say next. But again, we always, and I think for better or worse, we always made albums within a time frame that was our own, within an influence that was our own, and it was an honest expression of where we were at that given time. And I really think it's no exception, really, now. It's just there's more of a balance of that and more things to just consider.
It wasn't 100% certainty for you or the band in general that what's happening right now would happen at some point.
Absolutely not. And not even in the form that it is. I mean, I'm still friends with Tim, and I talk to him and we text and share music and such. And, we had thrown around the idea of what would it look like to reconvene, in some form or fashion. And that has not happened, but it's not out of the question of happening. I think it's a very fluid type of thing. And as far as, what Midlake is or was or will be, and even just all of us as friends and collaborators.
Is it possible to be collaborators in some way to work together on whether it's songwriting or putting a record together and not have him, necessarily be on tour? I mean, it sounds like that was a kind of a big sticking point for him.
He definitely didn't love the performing aspect, or at least I think that's what, I don't want to put words into his mouth, but that was something that, wasn't as enjoyable. I think, the kind of recording and making this piece of art that is an album was more his forte. But I think the crux of the problem became that even became a difficult thing for us to kind of collectively find a place of kind of mutual arrival of it being good enough, or it being great, or it being right, and that can be subjective,
In terms of his own sort of perfectionist tendencies and wanting to spend more time on something.
I mean, I think, without putting words in Tim's mouth, I think it was just arriving at the place where something was complete or right, and that being subjective between everybody. yeah, for him, I think he felt very confident in that when something was there, he would know it was there. And I think, we were quite open and transparent about, while working on that album that wasn't to be, that the frustrations lied in, I think, some of the guys that, man, I don't know what to do or how to participate to get it there. And Tim kind of feeling like, oh man, you don't trust me to help get it there, or to feel like we're going to kind of mutually arrive at a place that we agree. And so I'm just going to make the decision and go, and I kind of felt in between that in a lot of ways of trying to kind of salvage some place of hope.
You and anybody making a piece of art wants it to be the best thing that it can be. But, there's so many instances, particularly in like rock music or popular music, where things are just doomed by people trying to get it the last like 2% of the way there.
Yeah. Obviously it's hard to have an objective type of view of what you're doing. I think in some ways it was the saving grace of having John Congleton produce this album, is that when you're self-producing, yourself, recording, yourself mixing, it can be very heavy as far as trying to kind of decide what is right and what is wrong. And I think it was cause for, in some ways, kind of, I think, the strain that we maybe felt between, friends and artists of trying to kind of walk that balance beam,
A lot of factors at play. Obviously, everybody is invested in a particular record that in a way that maybe somebody coming in from the outside wouldn't be, in that they weren't there from the beginning. But also it's that old adage of, do fish know they're in water, where it's impossible to really have any sort of objective view of what you have been working on because you've been at the center of it.
Yeah. And I think somewhere in our process of making records, we did realize, the law of diminishing returns is a real thing, and songs can kind of lose their soul. They can lose the excitement and the spirit that is at the core, and a lot of times at the the paramount stage of recording. On that last album, we started playing songs live more than we ever had before recording them, and in some ways, it was. I don't want to say it was an Achilles heel, because it was, I think, a really good thing, but it became, how do we capture what we did with that song live now on a recording? And we couldn't. And I think that's okay. With Courage of Others, we actually did, I think, the 180 of that, where we made an album, then go, okay, let's not do that exactly live. Let's kind of bring it to life a little bit more.
I'm a tech journalist is my main gig. In that world, there's the phrase minimal viable product, which is
MVP.
What ingredients does this thing require for you to get it to market? And that's that's something that you have to do live, right? You don't have the luxuries that you have in the studio, and it's almost like a math problem of like, what are the ingredients that we absolutely need to make this thing work?
Well, that, and we also, I think there was a conscious effort of becoming a stronger live band, of bringing, now at that point we had 3 albums. Like how do we kind of navigate between the discography and really have a powerful live show? And of course that comes with your crew, with sound and lighting, but it's the kind of the presentation, just how you make a song that's recorded translate to a live performance. And that was and is really important to us.
How did you crack the code? What did you figure out? What was missing from the live show previously?
At that time, we added, we were a 5-piece for a long, long time. And I know it always probably is cliche where you start, adding, people, it's like, we got our.
We're just like a ska band all of a sudden.
We need more didgeridoos. I think there was partly that where, we recorded, in a lush, type of way. So it did help adding a couple people to the mix of just, what that would sound like. And you only have so many hands and so many voices. So that inherently helped. I think we were more conscious about, especially on Courage of Others, because they started to book us in like seated venues. And for a band, especially a rock band, even though we would say we're on the softer side of rock, when people are seated, it creates a certain, I don't know, it's just a certain vibe that it can make it a little bit more difficult to feel like there's that energy that I think we really longed and fed off of, longed for and fed off of. So I think it really was like trying to capture a stronger, bigger, more powerful performance and songs that even were a little bit more melancholic.
When people are seated, you almost like have to do more heavy lifting because they're not giving you back energy in the same way. Well,
I mean, I will say that, and I'm sure a lot of artists feel the same way, where sometimes you just have to kind of close your eyes and kind of get into the music yourself, or find the person that's getting into it even in a seated way and say, all right, because a live performance it's like an album of its own. It's like a new album of its own where you're creating something, even though these are songs, a part of a discography that is of itself and has its own experience that you talk about after the show, and that was a good one, and I really felt this song went well, and that one, I really felt like the crowd enjoyed this new one, or there is a narrative, a new narrative each night, and so not to say that something so binary as seated or standing can dictate that. I think it's just those little things that you notice that just kind of can help translate a feeling,
The math has to change pretty dramatically for you in the live setting when all of a sudden, like, you're out in front in a way that you hadn't been previously.
Absolutely. I mean, when, Tim and I were kind of like, we would both kind of stand at the middle of the stage, and I would talk mostly. But looking back, I started doubling melodies with Tim, and then I would switch to a harmony on songs, and it kind of, with vocals. So it kind of, in a way, even though it wasn't what I was wanting, it kind of helped create this evolution, transition of not being so much of a jump as it maybe would have been otherwise. So coming out of the gate with Antiphon, doing those songs, even though I wanted him there with me, I felt more comfortable than I would have otherwise, and knew that it wasn't my choice, but I still want to pay homage to that discography that we're all a part of, and that hopefully folks would still dig it. And I will say I was pleasantly surprised at the reception.
When the vast majority of your catalog was recorded with him around, you're effectively singing those old songs. You're singing his parts, and it's obviously it's not a cover song in that it's the same band. But when you do go out there and you do cover a song by another band, you have to sort of make that choice of how closely do I want to hew to the original artist's interpretation.
Yeah, I mean, musically, it's probably, it is. It's very similar, even though, bands can change kind of like how they represent a song. And for me, I actually don't love it when a band totally changes like the way, but I get it also. So I'm sure there's a little bit of that instrumentally or musically, but of course, vocally, that's the largest change, which would happen over time anyways with an artist, where you're like, all right, we're going to need to take this song down a step or maybe two steps, just to sing it, properly. But I again think that, especially with more albums, there were 3 albums that he sang lead on. Now there's 2 albums that I've sang lead on. It kind of gives you a little bit more options, to where maybe you're just playing 2 to 3 songs off of a past album, and you're kind of letting an audience or a fan base kind of grow, hopefully, with you, and always paying homage to that, but not having to rely as heavily on that music.
When a lot of people go out on tour and they haven't played a piece of music in a long time, they'll go back and listen to it on record, to jog their memory. In that case specifically, when you have to sort of, in a sense, reinterpret a song that he was singing on. What is that experience like? And like, how do you pay homage if that's what you're trying to do without trying to hew as closely as possible?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And I will say I am thankful to have sang a lot of those songs, whether, like I said, whether it was a melody or a harmony with Tim. Oops, sorry. Because it made it to where I didn't have to think about it. It's not like I was looking at a lyric sheet and going, okay, it was kind of already back there. And so we could play the song. I could sing the song. The guys could sing the harmonies, and it wasn't as much of a task of trying to, to make it something that seems so foreign to me, because it wasn't. I will say there's definitely something about writing a song and it being kind of it's just there. And then there's something about singing a song so much and knowing it, being so familiar with it, that it's there too. They are different things, but it's like anything that something comes on the radio of a song that you love, and it's just like the synonyms and the melody just comes out of your being because it's a part of you, because you've sang it just so many times that there was that was present, I think, even after a hiatus of like, oh yeah, that song. It's just kind of back there. You just kind of have to dig it up a little bit.
In terms of that transition specifically, we were saying for this last record, or the hiatus between the two, that it wasn't a foregone conclusion that the band would necessarily do this again. But when he left, was it pretty clear that the band was going to continue on?
It was at that time, and a big part of that was, I think, mine and our own stubbornness, and honestly just being hurt of feeling like, man, we've been working on an album for 2 years. We have made a commitment to make this an album together, even with our label, as I previously kind of mentioned, of some type of onus of like, well, we made a commitment. And that was, I think, the last album of that commitment, that we wanted to do something. And at the time, we had talked about, even with Tim, even though this was all very quickly, of using some of those ideas, those songs for the album. And then would I sing them? Would Tim sing them? It was just a big like whirlwind of like, what do we do now? And within a day or two, we had decided, look, we're just let's try to write all new music, all new songs, and make all new recordings, and that be the album. And again, I think part of it was our own stubbornness and being hurt and saying, no, I don't want to lean on that material. And, thankfully we were able to pull up the bootstraps and get it done.
I think that stubbornness is underrated as a motivator. People, just in terms of like forward momentum, but also not spite exactly, but it is something that I think that it is kind of underrated as a catalyst, as a factor in the creative process.
Well, yeah, I mean, I maybe less now than then, but I feel like time is a precious thing. I mean, even now, I mean, obviously in many different ways, but then my time was monopolized by our work on Midlake. It really was hard. It was a hard pill to swallow. Like, this 2 years of work and these songs are just going to be nothing. They're going to be nothing. They're going to go away. And so no one will hear them. This won't come out. This work will be for naught. It still bothers me to some degree, even though a couple of those songs did get released. I think I struggle with change sometimes, and that's a big change, So
there's no instance, and I've heard stories from a lot of like writers who had to throw out entire books for any number of reasons, and obviously there's a lot of stories in the music industry and all those machinations for somebody like not just writing an album but recording it and putting it out and it never coming out. And there's very few, if any, scenarios in which that's a pleasant process. I assume you were pouring your heart and soul and all those bodily fluids into the record, into those songs, in the way you would with any other set of songs.
It's true, but maybe it's my own I don't know, maybe transparency or lack of filter, where I would just say, this is what I had then. Now I'm going to do another album and hopefully it's better, but this is the best I had then, because otherwise then, okay, I'll just, obviously not put out that book or that album and then keep, writing another one. And it took me X amount of time to create a better one. I think I'd rather just be more transparent and say, this is the best I had then, whether I knew it or didn't, that wherever it fell on the scale, because it's hard when you're in the midst of it, to know what it is you've got other than where you're at. This is the thing that I created. This is the statement that I have to say right now. And I'll make another statement later. That's kind of how I look at it. And I realize it's not an easy. It's tough because when that filter's not there, well, then you're kind of throwing yourself to the lions. You're like, okay, well, I don't really believe in it, and now they're gonna really tear it to shreds, and then I'm gonna agree with them, and that's totally valid. But at the same time, I think it's in a way it's more honest of being, well, this is where I'm at right now. This is the best I've got right now. And tomorrow might have something better.
It's funny when you say time is a precious thing, in reference to, I guess, having to scrap all that. I usually, when I talk to musicians who've been in bands for a while, when they talk about time being a precious thing, it's a motivator as far as feeling like, hey, like, I don't have as many hours in the day, or maybe I have a family, or, I don't know how many like albums I necessarily have ahead of me, that it being a motivating factor of realizing at a certain point, time is a finite resource and you really want to put out that album that you've been putting off for a long time.
I definitely get in these like modes of like, okay, I'm working on this thing, you kind of get blinders on, and definitely that period was a blinder of, we're making a Midlake album, and when we're doing the banquet thing, or if I was doing a solo thing, and obviously when we did the new Midlake album, there's always going to be a balance with when you have a family, of course, where you're always doing that. And I think that's actually a healthy thing to have that, and that doesn't go away. But I personally, it's hard for me to look too far ahead, because it's much easier, and I think in my way, more responsible to be like, this is the thing that's like, I'm all about right now artistically. And I'm really want to be entrenched in that thing and focus on that thing. And if someone's like, well, okay, when are you making another Midlake record? Or are you going to do this thing or that? It's like, I don't know, because I those things are harder to straddle for me. And when we were in the trenches of that, and then of the Midlake album that never came out, well, after the fact, yeah, to answer your question, it's disheartening, because you're like, man, I was in that. And now I know that the time that I was in that, and all the guys could be like, that produced nothing. And maybe not that extreme of nothingness. You can always kind of pull some silver lining from it. But yeah, I wanted for myself and for everybody for that work not be for naught.
Maybe that's why for you on a personal level, the band needed to be on hiatus in order for your solo work or for Banquet or for anything else to really succeed, in that, if Midlake is still this kind of looming presence for you, and if that feels like a side project, then maybe you're not really able to focus 100% in on it in the way that you would be otherwise.
Well, yeah, I mean, it sounds cliche, but, the joy of doing these things really became a big part of why I wanted to do it. And not to say that Midlake was or isn't a joy, it just became a harder thing to enjoy. And even projects like Banquet or my solo album that you could easily say, weren't as successful, they were really enjoyable. And I really got to dig in and appreciate just the joy of making music with friends and touring and putting out albums. And I think now where we're at with Midlake, those things all exist again. And that's a really refreshing thing.
I think it's okay to admit that it wasn't a joy, that there were points that, maybe even long stretches where it wasn't a joy. I mean, that's healthy. You can't lie to yourself about that.
No, you're right. And it just sounds, I think,
you don't want to sound like you're taking it for granted, because you get
Sure.
to do this really cool thing. And I appreciate that. But it's, at the end of the day, as much as you love it, there are points when it is a job, when this is the thing that you're doing for a living. And like, it can't feel like living the dream every second of doing it.
Yeah. Anything, like you said, can become a job. And even though I do feel like we have appreciated and enjoyed that job, it did feel like it became more of a task and not worth the squeeze, and I think that was a big part of stopping, whether that was going to be a pause or a stop, that was a catalyst for that.
It sounds like the wheels were in motion prior to the pandemic starting. And I asked this because I was talking to a friend today about tenuously a band possibly getting back together, and I was comparing it to all those people who like hook up with or reconnect with their exes during the pandemic, where we've just like had all of these hours in a day to just reflect on like all of the good things and the things that we were missing. I mean, even though the wheels were in motion prior to the pandemic, is there a sense that the past 2 years have like played a role in really catalyzing things?
It goes without saying that absence does make the heart grow fonder, and there's a nostalgia or a romantic type of sentiment that goes along with reconvening. It's not like we didn't maintain a relationship, both personally and artistically, because we did, make music in different ways together, and obviously share time with our families, and we were still here in Denton. But the heaviness of a lockdown for an artist that's just like they're kind of bred to kind of like, I gotta go and do this and that and the other. It kind of made everybody get creative of like, okay, well, how can I do something? And I think the technology aspect helped. It kind of helped accomplish it, because we were doing things in silos. We were kind of sharing things over email or text and getting in like smaller groups. And we didn't all get together that much at all. And not really till we started getting closer with kind of the construction of these tunes. Yeah, I mean, it was kind of a double-edged sword, but it was also the silver lining of like, yeah, you can't go out and tour with somebody. You can't go do this thing or that. We're all here in Denton, Texas. And we all, before we got locked down, had this kind of respective yet mutual revelation of feeling good about making music together again as Midlake. And now in some ways we're forced to not have a lot of things to do. So yeah.
When you talk about the kind of the lack of urgency or, maybe not being like super prolific, do you feel like having stayed in the city has sort of lent itself to that, to not feeling like a super sense of urgency to have to put out an album every year or two?
I mean, it could. I mean, I will say, Denton has a comfort for everybody that maybe might not be offered elsewhere. There's, because the cost of living is just lower than LA or New York. It doesn't force you as much to have to hustle to go, okay, we got to go find the next gig or put out another album, or it's, not to say that those things necessarily would dictate what you're going to do, but of course it would at least create some urgency. But I appreciate that because Midlake has never been one to really produce by force or obligation. I will say, just as musicians outside of Midlake, of course, it's palpable when you're in a bigger city, and especially one like LA or New York, where just opportunity happens a lot quicker and in a very community type way. There's something different in that way. So I think you lose some of that, but the trade-off as far as the band, I would much rather just stay in Denton, Texas, because, we could have our own studio. We could, buy a home, and we started a bar that we own together. I mean, those are things that, I really feel have been valuable to us, and that the rat race that might occur inherently in a larger, more expensive market, just maybe not worth it.
Sly Stone was born there, if I'm not mistaken. There's obviously a lot of bands come through there as well, but it does have proximity to Dallas Fort Worth. But it's a small, it's what, like, somewhere between 100, 200,000 people. Is there something about it that really fosters musicality? Yeah, I mean, I think the University of North Texas, with the specifically with the jazz program that they've had for years and obviously is recognized worldwide, helps kind of create a foundational appreciation for the arts. And I think a lot of musicians that have come to that program, whether they were jazz or classical or any genre, and then found out like, well, there's only so many artists that can go fly to New York and just become just a jazzer or something, that musical influence then translated into pop or rock or whatever, as far as their musical genre. But I think it did create an inherent appreciation for the arts because it was so saturated with artists. And then those artists, a lot of them, like I said, they didn't go move to New York. They just stayed there, and they got married, had kids, they bought a home, they ran for council or whatever. And they were the people that were in your neighborhood, the people that went out and supported just what was the city and how it operated and operates. I do think that has evolved to some degree. The city has grown, 100, maybe 30, 140,000 people. There's not as much of a need to really go down to Dallas because we have what we need, in Denton. And I think that, at least for me, nothing against a metropolitan area, but it's kind of helped kind of
kind of marry the just the large and the small of what a city has. But there's I guess I'm saying that that little small town type vibe that still does exist has kind of a balance also of the growth that is happening as well. And I think with some of that, it can lose some of that artistic kind of thread, that kind of one that lacks any pretense, as the years go by. And it's also a larger conversation of just kind of where our culture is at, and you kind of see the devalue of art. But I would like to think that still does exist, whether that be literally in music and art, or just in architecture and in a cafe or a bar or a restaurant. I think our town really does have a great depiction of or representation of that, because if you were sitting in the middle of our downtown square and you're looking around, you would just see a bunch of great, independently owned mom and pop shops that are doing something just from their own hearts that they wanted to create. And I think that's a very unique thing.